So I get it.
Our website.
I also drank a fair amount of coffee.
Yours. Now.
Did you give it to me?
So technically, he did. Yeah, yeah. I said it.
Oh, I like it. Yeah. Yeah, that's what Jeff's a contract.
It is 5:30 and it's time to start our council meeting. Welcome, everybody, to the regular city council meeting of September 25th, 2023. And with that, I will ask our city clerk to please call the roll.
Counselor Long,
Present.
Counselor McLaughlin,
Present from Amarillo, Texas.
Counselor Runyon,
Present.
Randall,
Present.
Counselor Richardson,
Present.
Mayor Mace.
Present. Item 3 is Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to ask our council person, Darcy Long, if she would lead us in the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Counselor Long. Item 4 is the approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Counselor Randall and seconded by Counselor Long to approve the agenda. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Or
Aye.
raise your
Aye.
hand. Motion passes. Item 5 is presentations from Representative Jeff Helfrich, who is, I don't see him here, so I would suggest that perhaps we put this off until he does arrive, and at the first convenient time, we hear what he has to say. Is that all right with everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to audience participation. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject which does not later appear on the agenda. Up to 5 minutes per person will be allowed. Citizens are encouraged to ask questions with the understanding that the city can either answer the question tonight or refer that question to the appropriate staff member who will get back to you within a reasonable amount of time. If a response by the city is requested, the speaker will be referred to the city manager for further action. The issue may appear on a future meeting agenda for city council consideration. Okay. We only have one person signed up. Is there anybody else that did not sign up that would like to speak? If you could raise your hand. Okay. Miss Lisa Farquharson, if you would come forward, please. Please give us your name and what you do and there is, I like to remind everyone here, there's a clock in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Is that right? And please keep your comments to 5 minutes. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. I'm Lisa Farquharson at 404 West Second Street for the Dalles Chamber, and I just want to read the following statement. The Dalles Chamber wishes to express its gratitude to the mayor, city council, and staff for the challenging decision to initiate the legal closure of the St. Vincent de Paul community location on Pentland Street. We understand the invaluable service it offers and the vast number of individuals who rely on it. Yet the repercussions of its operation impose significant financial, mental, and safety burdens on the surrounding neighborhood. We're grateful that the city took the time to listen to the concerns of residents and businesses around St. Vincent's, addressing our worries about safety and the continuation of smooth business operations. The comprehensive and deliberate process leading up to this decision, marked by accurate reporting and devoid of emotional biases, speaks to the city's dedication. Every available avenue, from letters and meetings to phone calls, was explored in hopes of reaching an alternative resolution. We are truly appreciative of your unwavering commitment to the Dalles, striving always to make our community a haven of safety and a healthy environment. I also have one letter to submit that was written by Sean Phillips, who is one of the residents who lives behind the chamber.
Thank you. I believe we all have a copy of that letter. Thank you very much. I would just like to clarify one thing. I think I heard you use the word closure. I would just like to clarify that the city is not out to close the facility. We just would like to have them provide their necessary service to the needy in a way that is appropriate for the neighborhood. So having said that, we'll move on. Item 7 is the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have quite a few different items I wanted to take a moment to update the council on. Starting with just an update from the Beautification and Tree Committee. They've been spending several months and a substantial amount of time and effort developing a tree grant program. And that program recently moved forward with 28 trees awarded under the program that's planned to be planted this fall. And I just wanted to give a shout out to those volunteers and committee members and staff who have supported and worked with that group to get this effort completed. There was quite a few different site visits, research and considerations and thought put into how these trees might go in and what their potential impact could be in the right of way or with different public utilities and things of that nature. We are still slated to have a short-term rental discussion item for the council at our second meeting in October. The demolition of the Tony's building is expected to begin later on this week. And a 90-day FEMA flood map appeal period begins in mid-October. And so the Community Development Department will be sure to be sending out different postcards to all affected property owners to let them know of this window. The upstairs City Hall remodel, you may have noticed on the way in, is proceeding ahead of schedule. I think that's very much appreciated by all the different city staffers we have here at City Hall because it can get fairly noisy at times, but it seems to be progressing well. I have two updates from our Public Works Department. Dave Anderson was going to be here tonight, but he is a little under the weather. The first is the Dog River Pipeline. There was some impact by the high fire season designations that we received over this last summer. So it's delayed the project for about 4 weeks or so. There are two contractors who are working on this project, one focused on pipeline replacement and the other on fish passage and screening. The pipeline replacement project is going well. The new pipeline should all be installed roughly in the next 2 weeks, and that'll allow the contractor to shift over into cleanup and restoration efforts, which will likely extend into the spring season. Fish passage and screening, this work is certainly going to extend, or most likely extend into the next year. But the in-water work and the permit associated with that is expected to be completed no later than October 31st. And then over the winter, if the pipeline is successfully put in place and is in service, we may install some temporary diversion systems to allow the new pipeline to actually be used and be in service. The Water Master Plan was the other update from the Public Works Department. This has a target date for completion in midsummer of 2024. They are progress meetings held on a biweekly schedule, and we're pending some additional and final future water demand data from some of our different users that will be used in this effort. But a lot of the technical analysis for the water treatment plant, the water system facilities, and climate resiliency have been drafted at this point. And so that's progressing as well. Two items included in the packet and noted on the agenda this evening. The first was a proposed city facility management and trespass policy. This is a policy that I had drafted, intended to set clear structure and guidelines and direction to staff if and when there are events at a city facility that interrupt city operations or threaten city staff and property. We really wanted to take this as a proactive measure to set some of these processes and procedures in place before additional incidents or an incident may occur. We have had a few different instances over the last few months where an individual has become irate or has used a bathroom inappropriately or tried to access areas that are only for staff. And so having this as guidance to our staff is important. There are some exceptions to this policy. We want to make sure that people can conduct the business that they need to, which could include attending a public meeting, paying or attending court, and paying utility bills. The other item was at the council's request, where we have an update to the city funding request process. This stemmed from the budget process we went through earlier this year. And so we've gone through and updated that request form, the additional information that we ask to be submitted with any request for funding, and that the deadline would be January 31st in order to be considered through our city budget process. Some of the additional information that we asked for was how past funding was used, if the applicant had received funds in the past, as well as how the mission or the project or the activity to be funded aligns with the community's vision action plan, as well as the city's mission and council goals. This will be available on our website and through a paper form as well, and wanted to share that progress with you as we move forward on that front.
I had a question about that. On your chart, which I'm having trouble pulling up your email, but I noticed on the last couple at that on the right-hand side for the 1 year, I believe C and F are identical.
Oh, good catch. Thank you.
And so I was wondering if that's supposed to be thanks. If that was supposed to say threatening conduct, because that's the one that doesn't carry across anywhere.
Right. I'll get that cleared up.
Okay, thanks. Wasn't sure.
Are you finished with your report?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for the city manager? Okay, moving right along. Item 8 is council reports. We'll start on my right with Councilor Long.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So last Tuesday was our Urban Renewal Agency meeting. As the city manager mentioned, the Tony's building will be coming down. We had a little delay because of some of the artifact work, but that's complete now. At our next meeting, we'll be discussing the RFP and what the agency wants to include in that. And so if you have thoughts on that, you can reach out to the Urban Renewal Agency or attend the meeting. And last week, I was also in Washington, D.C. with the community outreach team. I was there with the mayor and Lisa Farquharson, who's also here, as well as Cindy Gentry, who came from Northern Wasco County PUD. She was back there for some other meetings and was able to attend a couple of days with us. And Greg Wiest from the Port of the Dalles, as well as Andrea Kloss from the Port of the Dalles. And Scott Hagee from the County Commission was also there. Basically, we went back and talked with all of our Congress people from both Washington and Oregon, and we took back some projects as well as some policy issues. That's my report.
Thank you. Councilor Randall,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing to report.
Councilor Richardson,
Mr. Mayor, approximately a week and a half ago, I attended an orientation following an appointment to the MCED board. A couple days later, also that week, I attended a League of Oregon Cities Small Cities meeting in Mosier, and I have some thoughts and documents about that if anybody wants to have a conversation about it offline. I've had a couple of conversations with constituents about St. Vincent's / the Pentland Street issues, and a number of conversations on a non-city issue, but one that's central to our community, which is the school bond issue, which is coming up for a vote the middle of next or late next month. And I want to just say, I think that's a really important one for our community, something that I think we need to take very careful look at and support. I think we need a new high school. And then I went on vacation last week, so I missed a couple of meetings.
Counselor Runyon.
On September 15th, I attended and was the keynote speaker for the Prisoner of War Missing in Action National Recognition Day at Kelly Viewpoint. And then on the 20th, attended and participated in the Veterans Stand Down at the Civic Auditorium, first one that we've had probably in 5 or 6 years due to several circumstances, but well attended by numerous agencies throughout the Mid-Columbia. And if nothing else, just the networking between them to have the names and faces and whatnot to make referrals from one agency to another. It was a great success. I don't have numbers on how many veterans were there, but there were a number throughout the 5 hours that it went on. On the 23rd, I participated in the 20th annual Pig Bowl, raising funds for 3 medically challenged families. It was the 20th year of that endeavor, and they've done great work. And I'm sure this week in the press, they'll have the final numbers that were raised and divided among the families. That's it.
Thank you. Counselor
Mayor May.
McLaughlin, do you have a report?
No report for this session.
Okay. So several items. I attended the celebration at the National Neon Sign Museum to announce the arrival of the Jansen Beach Carousel to the Dalles in the next few years. I also met with the new executive director of the Art Center, the Dalles Art, Sally Johnson, very enthusiastic lady who's got some great plans for the Art Center. I also attended the Community Affairs Committee for the guest speaker was Jose Aparicio, who is the president of the school board, and I believe that Councilor Richardson mentioned his support for the project, and certainly that the project has my support as well. I also went to Washington, D.C., as Councilor Long pointed out, and I do have one further item, which is very important. I would like to ask our city clerk to please stand and come forward.
You got that one.
That's a direct order. No, that yeah, you, yeah.
Reminding me.
He's rummaging for something.
I do the same thing.
Find it.
Tying your shoes or looking for something?
I had nothing to do last weekend, so I threw these in my backyard. For those of you who don't know, is Izetta's last city council meeting. She's retiring after 17 years with the city of the Dalles, 8 of which were as city clerk, 9 of which were as assistant to the city manager. Speaking for myself, I think you've done a super great job. You've been a joy to work with. You have a lot of perseverance, organizational skills. I think you ought to think about a career in city management.
Yeah, no, I'm retired.
But as a small token of our esteem for you and our appreciation, please don't let me drop this. It's heavy.
You're gonna hand it to me.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mayor Mays.
Anybody else would like to say a few words to do a better job than I did presenting those flowers? I think this might be the time.
Mayor
That's right.
Mays, this is
Counselor,
Counselor.
let me
Let
get
him go. He's a
President, Counselor McLaughlin.
Yes. When in doubt, ask Izetta, because that's what I've learned during the past, decade. And Izetta is an amazing, effective city clerk, and I consider her a friend. And very, very well-deserved retirement to you, Izetta. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Tim. Counselor Runyon.
well. I said as a member of my church as well, so I get to see a couple of different sides of her over the years. There's many times we think we know the answer for something, and then we ask Izetta about it, and she's usually right. And if she's not right, she makes you believe she's right. She runs City Hall very, very well, and there's always a method to any madness that may be thought of out there, and gets the job done, and usually with a smile. And I appreciate her thoughtfulness and the way she tackles things logically and to completion. And you've just been a great asset to the city, and we're going to miss you.
Counselor Richardson.
Thank you. I said I've only known you 3 years since I started on city council, and besides being very sort of welcoming in that role, which I've appreciated, I've always been struck by just the spirit of giving you have, giving service, giving of mindful action in to your city, and I just really appreciate that. I think I'm going to probably mess up your saying that you've shared with us a number of times, or I've shared by email and by voice, both in a world where you can do anything, be anything, be kind. And that's just a real sincere appreciation. I want to be like that too.
Counselor Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I first joined the city council in June of 2020, Izetta was the first to welcome me aboard. She provided me everything I needed to get started, and she read the oath of office and swore me in. Since then, since that first meeting, she's assisted me numerous times and has always shown the highest level of courtesy, competence, and professionalism. And thank you for all you do, Izetta. We're going to miss you.
Counselor Long.
Yeah, so the problem with going last is a lot has been said, but the things that I would say is that 7 years ago, when I ran for office, you provided me with a packet that explained everything. That was something that was above and beyond, I think, what you needed to do to help people run for office. And I hope that Amy will continue to hand that out to other people that want to run for city council. I have also learned so much, and I really value the feedback that you've given me one-on-one for how to better approach things, better words to use, kinder ways to phrase things, for example. And I do really appreciate that. And that is something that you are very well known for, is treating everyone equally and fairly, especially when they come into City Hall and they're not sure what they need or what they're not sure what to expect, maybe expecting a confrontation. And I know that you've always dealt with people kindly and tried to help them, that's really the service is from the bottom of your heart. And I do appreciate that. And I appreciate all the hard work I know you've been doing to pass on what you know, because you've been here for so long. I don't know how we could ever get a brain dump, but you're going to be missed, certainly. And thank you for everything.
I'll just wrap this up by suggesting that in my roles, many roles in previous cities, I always realized how important employee morale was. And I learned early the secret to Izetta's employee morale, and that is the numerous times that she would tell me what to do, I would just do it. That was the secret. So I thought we all got off to a good start, and you will be missed, and don't be a stranger. So how about one last hand for Izetta?
Can I just say one thing? No, it's just one quick thing. We don't always agree with our counselors. We don't always think that they've thought about it or that they know what they're doing. These people care more about your city than you'll ever know. You don't become a counselor or a mayor or a city manager or a city attorney or anyone who works for the city without wanting what's best for this organization. Do we make mistakes? Sure. Do we step on toes sometimes? Oh boy. But always with the best interest of the whole at heart. Always. This is a good group of people. I'm leaving a city I love as a municipal employee, but not as a citizen. I encourage you all to always make sure your voices are heard, because they can't do anything if they don't know about it. Thank you all for a wonderful 17 years. I have learned so much from all of you, and I'm a better person because of it. but truly we are public servants. And as long as you keep that in mind, you'll always make the best decision.
Thank you, Izetta, very much for those words. Very, very heartwarming and true. Okay, item 9 is the consent agenda. Tonight, we have 2 items on the consent agenda. One is the approval of the September 11th council meeting minutes, and second is a resolution assessing property for the costs of nuisance abatement. Do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Counselor Long and seconded by Counselor Richardson to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye
Aye.
or raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 10A, a contract for the Downtown Tree Project Award. Is that Josh?
Correct.
Our Director of Community Development, please come forward. Mr. Josh Chandler, please tell us all about the Downtown Tree Project.
Hey, good evening. Joshua Chandler, Community Development Department. So the next item here on our agenda, contract number 23-13, which is the Dalles Downtown Tree Project Award. So over the last few years, the overall health of our trees downtown has become a matter of concern throughout our community. We hear about it, the overall maintenance and upkeep of these trees, and has become a key project for consideration at the city over this next year in the coming years. Maintaining street trees in our community has a multitude of benefits that extend past just aesthetics and appearance. They play a crucial role in improving the environment, supporting economic and social well-being, and contribute to a vibrant and livable city for all of us, as well as visitors. As identified by the Dalles-Wasco County Joint Ad Hoc Climate Resiliency Committee, that's a tongue twister there, increasing the tree canopy throughout our city can result in an overall reduction of urban heat island effects. Beginning in 2021, the city's Beautification and Tree Committee began a series of discussions to help mitigate and address the overall health of our city's existing tree inventory. This resulted in recommendations to the city manager for assistance from Oregon Department of Forestry to provide additional guidance in this work. And working with ODF, the Beautification and Tree Committee compiled information regarding best practices with planting, watering, fertilizing, soil care, numerous things, as well as identifying specific tree species good for the Dalles climate. In addition, ODF recommended and provided tutorials to members of the committee as well as staff for the use of the Oregon Tree Plotter software program, which is a program that the city can use to document and understand our trees more, understand where they're located and factors that are impacting their health. The work of this group was used to prepare a request for proposal for the Downtown Tree Project, which was published on August 8th, 2023. When we talk about the downtown trees, we're really referring to the trees that are from about the park and ride lot on the east side of the roundabout down to the Lincoln 2nd, 3rd couplet intersection that we have, extending to the north and south of each, basically extending north half of a block and south half of a block along 2nd Street. The project scope for the RFP included maintaining a certified arborist for the project for the life of the project, assessing the overall health of our trees, soil care, fertilizing, watering, as well as planting of these selected trees that I mentioned were outlined by the Beautification Committee as well as ODF. Additional detail of the proposal has been provided to you on the dais as well. On August 22nd, staff hosted a mandatory site visit. This started here in the office. Then we walked down and kind of looked a couple blocks. We looked at the overall health of some of our trees to get as an example to answer some questions related to the RFP. 2 contractors joined us for this meeting. The proposal the opening for the, the proposal opening for the project was held on September 5th. And the city received 2 proposals. A list of those 2 proposals has been provided in the staff report. They include FLI as well as Davy Tree Company. Following the proposal opening, staff reviewed the proposals received for completeness as described in the RFP. The result of that review was that Davy Tree Expert Company had complied with all proposer requirements described in the RFP and was deemed a qualifying proposer. Staff determined the other proposal from FLI was incomplete, therefore listed as non-responsive. Staff is recommending awarding this contract to the one responsive bidder, Davy Tree Expert Company, to the amount of $206,980. I'll break those numbers down just a little bit. This project was not specifically budgeted in our budget this year, but it's considered a capital project pending these bid results. And staff is recommending that the city allocate the initial project cost of $137,180 from the capital projects fund. This fund is used to complete capital improvements to cities' buildings, the city's building and facilities. At the time of this report, that fund had about $2.5 million in it, so there is sufficient funds to complete the work. In addition to that, there is annual maintenance for this project to oversee the health of these trees over a 3-year period of time. The initial cost is this, of course, this upfront cost of $137,000, and then the cost over the next 3 years kind of trickles down as certain aspects of care in the project kind of diminish. This project is set to occur over the next 3 years, extending into the 26-27 fiscal year. Staff will budget for the continued maintenance in our general services fund. During the 24-25 and 25-26 fiscal years, the annual maintenance will cost $26,150. And then in the final year, it'll be $17,500. As I mentioned, it starts out with initial watering and fertilizing, and then fertilizing and the soil care kind of diminishes over the period of the project. So staff's recommendation is to authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with Davy Tree Expert Company for the downtown tree project, contract number 2023-13, in the amount not to exceed $206,980. This was a correction from your staff report, which listed the incorrect number. And before I take questions, I also want to have a shout out to our city clerk, Izetta Grossman, who helped quite a bit getting this to where it is, getting this project to where it is. I mean, she really had a lot of passion behind this. So it was exciting that we were able to get this in front of you and appropriate for her last meeting. So with that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from Mr. Chandler? Council Runyon.
Just one, understanding that the money's coming out of capital projects this year. That was not specific, but next year, will it be a line item under capital projects, or how will it be handled for the remaining costs the next 2 years?
Yeah, so the remaining years, it will actually be under the general services. We'll budget in the general services fund for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Can I hit Councilor Richardson first?
Of
or do
course.
you have a-
No, go ahead.
Okay, Councilor Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Director Chandler and Izetta and the Beautification Tree Committee. I just want to say thank you, and I'm just very happy to see this come to fruition after a considerable amount of work getting it there. So I'm happy to see it. I'm happy to support it. I'd have 1 or 2 very quick questions, if I may reference the contract. Looks like removing 62 dead or dying trees is one of the bullet points. And if I'm reading this right, correctly, planting another 68. Yeah. And then considerable amount of maintenance. And in your conversations, do you have any thoughts about whether this is a phase one of a larger effort in years to come? Is this a one and done? What are the sort of internal consensus you might have about that?
Yeah, I see this, the success as mentioned, we've seen our streets struggle a bit these past few years. So this is definitely the opportunity to have a successful project. And then from there, from the successes, we could learn and then move on to other aspects of our city downtown. There could be, addressing the trees along 3rd Street. We will have trees that are planted with the First Street project when the First Street project is built, and that's a construction year of 2026. So this project will also help provide information for the First Street project for best practices to include that.
Oh, that's great. And I know you've already talked about some of the many benefits that trees bring to an urban area, of which you were correct. Some folks will say, look, there's a cost to having trees as well. It costs, there's impacts to infrastructure from time to time, which is true. But I want to put a sort of a flag on the idea that, a big healthy tree is infrastructure. And so go big, say aye. Thanks.
Yep.
Other questions? Just to clarify, it mentions in the agreement with Davy Tree that they're from an Ohio business corporation, but they must have a branch in Portland, right? Because this company's from Portland.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah, this branch is.
Yeah. Do you know where FLI is from?
They're local.
So I thought, okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Our city attorney.
Okay. Just a question for Director Chandler. You mentioned in the end of your staff report, there was a correction to your staff report. I just wanted to confirm the number that you have. So the motion carries. And so is the total amount not to exceed 206,980?
Yes.
Appreciate it. That's it.
Looking for a motion?
I'll make that motion. I move that we authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with the Davy Tree Expert Company for the Dalles Downtown Tree Project, contract number 2023-13 in an amount not to exceed $206,980.
I'll second that.
Moved by Councilor Richardson and seconded by Councilor Long to award the contract for the downtown tree project. Is there any more discussion or questions?
Yes, I have one question. Did we also need to specify that the initial allocation is coming out of the capital projects line? Is that?
Mr. Mayor, I have an answer.
Yeah, go, please.
We don't need to specify those types of, line items and where the funding is going to be coming from, except during budget committee and things of that nature. But otherwise, so long as there's sufficient, budget and resources available to cover the costs of the contract, we're fine with just the authorization.
Okay, we ready for a vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Item 10B is a contract for the South Apron reconstruction, new taxi lanes and new fuel apron project. Mr. Renard.
Mayor and council members. I'm here seeking the award of a construction contract for the South Apron reconstruction and new taxi lanes and a new fuel apron. I've got much longer project numbers than Josh's were. If you care, I would read them. If not, I'll forego the AIP numbers. The background on this is that the city put out we solicited bids for the South Apron reconstruction and new taxi lanes and a new fuel apron for the airport. The South Apron will consist of, the South Apron reconstruction and taxi lane project will reconstruct the existing South Apron pavement and will also construct 5 new taxi lanes at the airport. The project will include the full depth reconstruction of approximately 90,000 square feet of existing south apron pavement and construct 5 new taxi lanes to facilitate future hangar construction. The existing south apron construction will reconstruct the apron pavements adjacent to the and directly south of the airport terminal and main apron area. The new fuel apron will be constructing approximately 23,000 square feet of new fuel apron in a new location where we'll be able to put our new fuel system, above ground fuel system. As I believe I previously updated, we've got a couple of different grants in the works to remove an underground system at the airport, and before we could ever remove that underground system, we needed to have this in place. So this was one of the priorities of getting the new apron in place. And we also received a core grant from the state of Oregon to put a new above ground fuel system in as well, once this portion of the project is completed, just as a side note to that. Each of the projects, the south apron reconstruction and taxi lanes, that is a $2,962,501.13 project. And the fuel apron project is a $401,502.83 project. The 23-24 budget does include the total number of $3,364,003.96 for the south apron and reconstruction, taxi lanes, and fuel apron projects in our balanced budget. And does anybody have any questions in regards to?
Any questions for Mr. Renard?
Just briefly, Jeff, refresh our memory. Where does the money come from?
The money that we're looking at on here, the $3,364,000 comes from the federal AIP, Airport Improvement Plan grants, combined with the bill, which I believe is, I don't remember what the bill terminology is, the infrastructure bill is the secondary grant for the 401,000.
So how much local money are we putting into this $3.36 something $1 million project?
Yes.
A ballpark.
I'm gonna have to break it down in a couple different things for you. We have a $250,000 grant to backstop we have a $250,000 grant from the state of Oregon to cover 90% of the $2.9 million. So we would have.
So pretty modest percentage of this project.
It actually worked out to 4%, and I apologize.
That's what I was looking for.
Jonathan recommended I bring a number, and I couldn't lay hands on it as I was walking out the door tonight. It got interrupted.
It's a big number, and 96% is coming from the feds or the state.
Correct. Our total local investment is just slightly greater than 4%.
Seems like pretty good return for local.
It is, and I
money.
apologize for not having that number.
Oh, thanks.
The-
That's what I wanted.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Kara.
Jeff, is that 4%? Is that the city's portion or the airport's portion?
4% would be the city's portion.
Okay.
Yeah, it was all,
I apologize. That would be the airport's portion. That would be the sponsor, airport sponsors portion. So that will be split between Clickitat County and the city of the Dalles.
So as far as City of the Dalles' contribution out of 100%, is it 2% then?
Yes, of the 4 point, some small increment there. Yes,
Because we split half of it with Clickitat County.
correct. 50% of that is split with Clickitat County.
Thank you.
Yes,
perhaps, would our finance director like to clarify anything?
we do.
Right.
All of it is.
That'd be in the airport fund?
Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Is there a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to authorize the city manager to execute the South Apron reconstruction, new taxi lanes, and new fuel apron contract with James Dean Construction, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $3,364,003.96, contingent upon Clickitat County Board of County Commissioners approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Council Randall and seconded by Council Richardson. Authorize the city manager. Construction. Is there any more discussion or questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record show Councilor McLaughlin has raised his hand. Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Jeff. Item 11A is a discussion, or actually it's an action item regarding Senate Bill 111 and deadly force plan update. Chief Worthy.
Mayor Mays, members of the council, for the record, my name is Tom Worthy. I'm the chief of police here in the Dalles. I come before you this evening to update the council on our efforts to update our Senate Bill 111 required officer use of deadly physical force plan, which was initially enacted as a state law in 2007. The plan, or the law, I should say, created a planning authority in each county to develop and maintain an action plan concerning the use of deadly physical force by police officers. And the bill was passed into law in the full legislature and signed by the governor. So we are bound by it. The Senate Bill 111 is extremely prescriptive in its requirements in that we can't vary wildly from what it says we need to do. We just need to create the plan. And this is an update of a plan that was created in 2007. And the Dallas City Police Department has been in compliance with this law the entire time. So several months ago, it came to my attention that this plan was still signed by multiple people who are no longer in office or in their positions that they were at the time. So we went forward with a series of meetings with our partners to update and refresh the plan and ensure that we were meeting its requirements. Some of the requirements in Senate Bill 111 are for notification, both for the agency, unions that are involved, the district attorney, and the family of the involved member. It gives a timeline for the officer interview. As you know, an officer using deadly physical force will need to submit to an interview to determine what happened in the case. And it gives us that timeline. Also talks about scene and evidence management, a timeline for return to work for the officer wellness precautions that are now enacted in law, and components of the plan. It also talks about outside agency participation in the investigation, and that is a requirement, which I think is really one of the main impetuses of Senate Bill 111 in its genesis, was that agencies don't simply investigate their own shootings, but collaborate with partners in doing so to add transparency and neutral eyes, if you will. So that's a key component there. Also, it talks about the district attorney's role in the investigation, and the district attorney is a member of our planning authority and was present at our meetings and provided great input for us on how to proceed. Investigative protocols, grand jury review if required, critical incident debriefing is a section in the plan. DPSST minimum training is a section which we comply with, and the use of force reporting to the National Use Force Database, as well as the Oregon Attorney General's office. On September 13th at 5:30 in these chambers, we held a public hearing, which was noticed to the public through our Facebook account and other methods for people to give meaningful input, and people did. We held the meeting, and it was voted to advance the plan through our planning authority. One thing to note in our plan is we are trying to get together with our partners in Sherman County and Hood River County to regionalize the plan because they are key participants in our major crimes team plan. Our major crimes team plan is referenced through the Senate Bill 111 plan. So it's one plan that references another, both of which are required, both of which we comply with. And so we would like to have one plan regionally for the county or for the Mid-Columbia Gorge region. If not, we're prepared to go ahead as a standalone entity for Wasco County only. Ideally, our partners in those other counties will join us. The next step in the process will be to forward the plan to the Oregon Attorney General's office, and they do have final say and keep a documented copy of that on file at the state level as well. I'm willing to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions for the chief? Mentioned that our district attorney was a partner in developing the plan. I want to recognize Mr. Matt Ellis, who's here, our district attorney. Thank you for coming. How many people attended the public hearing?
It was lightly attended, but it was helpful. There were some good ideas that came out of the session, and it caught a typo that somehow we misspelled schedule or section wrong in there. They caught it and Word didn't. So that was great too. So it did get transparency and outside eyes on it.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else? Council Runyon.
Since our district attorney did come in person to the meeting, have you asked him if he would like to speak?
Would you like, anything you'd like to say, Mr. Ellis?
Chief Worthy covered it all.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Looking for a motion.
We don't have a specific resolution here, do we? Just
Well, there is a staff recommendation on the bottom of page 2.
three. Whoever finds it first can go ahead.
Make the motion. I move to approve the Wasco, Sherman, and Hood River County Senate Bill 111 Deadly Physical Force Plan as presented.
I'll second it.
Moved by Counselor Long and seconded by Counselor Runyon to approve the deadly physical force plan as presented. Is there any more discussion or questions?
Just one random thought here. You really had no control over this at all, other than how you put it together, if it's individually as a city or with the county or a variety of counties. The state pretty much dictated it.
That is correct. It's dictated through the law itself. It does say a county-wide approach. So, and it delineates the participants within that county. So in a county with multiple other cities, there'll be a representative rather than all the chiefs trying to get together with the sheriff. The sheriff is named, the DA is named, as well as the other participants. So yeah, it's very prescriptive in that regard, and there's not a lot of room for artistic writing.
In other words, if we did not adopt it, the skies would open and that would be the end of things as we know them.
And it'd be back to the drawing board.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve the plan as presented. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Counselor McLaughlin has raised his hand as well. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Chief. Item 12A is one of my favorite subjects, the proposed housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory update. Mr. Chandler.
Thank you again. I am joined this evening by our consultant, Matt Hasty, as well as CJ Doxey with MIG and Brendan Buckley with Johnson Economics. So a little overview here before we get into this, and Matt will put together, Matt has put together a presentation, so he'll go through some slides. He'll really break down this information for you. I just wanted to provide a little brief intro to all of this. So beginning this spring, the city of the Dalles, with assistance from MIG and Johnson Economics, began a series of discussions regarding a regional housing needs analysis. This will be referred to as an HNA. This is an update that will serve as a critical tool for making informed decisions and developing strategies to address citywide housing issues more effectively. With the help of City Council, our Planning Commission, and a Project Advisory Committee, this will help shape effective housing policies and strategies that enhance the well-being and quality of life for residents within the Dalles. The city last completed an HNA in 2016 with assistance from Angelo Planning Group. Angelo Planning Group is now has morphed into MIG, as well as Johnson Economics through a technical assistance grants from DLCD. In the years since the 2016 HNA, the city or the state has continued to grapple with a growing housing crisis and a rising number of residents experiencing houselessness. To better address this, the state legislature adopted House Bill 2003 in 2019, which requires cities with a population over 10,000 to conduct a regional HNA every 6 to 8 years to analyze current and future housing needs. This analysis identifies the types of housing needed for current and future residents and ensures the city has enough residential land available to meet this need for the next 20 years. In addition to this analysis and this information, each city must then adopt a housing production strategy with specific actions to promote the development of all identified housing types, which may include code amendments or financial incentives. The work for the Dalles housing production strategy will begin next calendar year. The initial discussion in this update was held on August 3rd at a regularly scheduled planning commission meeting and included members of a project specific advisory committee with presentations from Matt Hasty. Followed up by that, following that discussion was another meeting, August 17th at Planning Commission. This information was gathered and will be presented for you tonight. Subsequent meetings will follow with Planning Commission and City Council in November to go through the adoption process of this information. And we do appreciate all the work, everybody involved in this important work, and encourage your appreciation, or excuse me, encourage your participation and expertise with creating an update that truly resembles housing needs for the Dalles. Budget implications, this work was budgeted last year as well as this year. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Matt, who will take it away.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me here and other members of the team. So I'm going to share a presentation with y'all in just a second, and then myself and Brendan and CJ will sort of tag team the presentation. So I'm going to put it up on the screen now, hopefully. Yep. All right. Can you all see that fine on your screen there?
Yeah, we can see it. Maybe you could speak up a little bit, Matt.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. I'll get a little closer to the screen and just talk louder. Yeah. So again, thanks for having us. So I'm going to walk through just the very first part of this presentation, talk about the process and schedule generally. And then Brendan will talk about the component related to projecting future land needs, housing and land needs. CJ will talk about buildable lands inventory, and I'll finish up talking about the proposed comprehensive plan amendments. So those are really kind of the three components of this process, and you see those on this flow chart: projecting future housing needs and the associated land to be able to develop that housing. That's kind of the demand side of the equation. An inventory of buildable lands that are zoned for residential use and where housing can be built now and in the future. That's the buildable lands inventory, or the supply side of things. Then we compare those things and identify whether or not you have enough land to accommodate those future housing needs based on this analysis. And then as part of this process, we also identify a set of amendments to your comprehensive plan, both to the finding sections, but also to the goals and policies. So we'll talk about each of those pieces as we kind of go through. It's not a super long presentation, and we'll try to go through it, fairly expeditiously. And I would say, feel free to interrupt me if you have questions, me or Brendan or CJ, but we'll also, save time at the end for questions or see if you have any more questions at the end. So, and so as Josh said, kind of the next step is the adoption process, is public hearings with your planning commission and with you all to adopt this. So this is just sort of another way of looking at the process and the schedule. I won't talk about this too much because Josh already talked about the advisory committee meetings we had and kind of where we are in the process. But we're now into the adoption phase, and we wanted to make sure we had a work session with you all before we went into that phase of the process. So I am now going to turn it over to Brendan. He's going to cover the next few slides, and Brendan, just let me know when you're ready for me to go to the next one if I haven't already done it.
Okay, will do. Thank you. So, hi, I'm Brendan Buckley with Johnson Economics. We worked on some of the technical sides of the report and coming up with the forecast of housing need and a breakdown of housing types, population growth, and so on. The components of the report are discussions of your current demographic trends, a lot of census data, and a look at your current population and households. Housing conditions, talking about your actual housing stock, estimates of the types of housing you have, and so on. And then we try to come up with an estimate of your current housing need, basically a snapshot of today, a look at how your current stock is meeting the needs of your current population. And we do that before we then look 20 years into the future and come up with the projection of housing need over the planning period. Next slide. We use a lot of data sources that we are combining to come up with this information. So we use the 2020 census where available. That's the most, it has the lowest margin of error, and it's still fairly recent data at this point. The American Community Survey, also done by the census, provides sort of more data sets and on a more recent basis, but it has a higher margin of error. So we're trying to use the sources that we have to come up with the best estimate that we can get. So the population, the PSU Population Center, that's Portland State University, they have a specific department that works on coming up with population forecasts around the state. And the current state statute is states that cities outside the metro area that are going through this process of a housing needs analysis, they need to use the adopted housing forecast from Portland State University. So that number in a sense for future population in 2043 is provided to us in a sense, and that's what we need to use for our analysis. And then obviously we use a range of other types of data sources to try to come up with most of the. Next slide. In terms of your current housing conditions, so in the city of the Dalles, we estimate that the occupied units are about 62% owner occupied, 38% renter occupied. Of the owned owner occupied units, most are 3 or more bedrooms, so they tend to be larger units, and of course many single family homes, which tend to be larger than apartments. And then for rental units, about 65% of them are 2 bedrooms or fewer. That's to be expected that most apartments or rental apartments would be 2 bedrooms or fewer. It's actually a fairly good share of units, rental units that you have that have more than 2 bedrooms. So that's a good thing to see. A lot of communities don't have larger rental units, so that's a good thing. On the right, you see a breakdown of the housing types, unit types of in green is owner occupied units, and in the orange is renter occupied units. So as in most places, most of your ownership stock is going to be single family detached homes and some manufactured homes where the rental stock is usually a little more dispersed over different housing. Slide. These are the sort of takeaway numbers that we found in terms of population, households, and housing units. So we estimate that right now within your urban growth boundary, which is larger than your city boundary, you have a population of about 17,500 people in 6,800 households and 7,200 housing units. So the number of housing units is usually quite a bit, well, not quite a bit, but usually more than the number of households to account for vacancy, any short-term rental activity you have, and that kind of thing. Looking forward to the end of our time frame, 2043, we estimate that the population will grow by more than 1,000 people, little more than 400 households, and to serve that new need over the 20-year period, there will be a need for about 500 housing units in the community. So again, that forecast, what's essentially driving it is that first number, population in 2043, and that is the estimate that we get from the Portland State program that we're required to use. That is, it did come in lower. So the most recently adopted forecast done by them was a more modest growth forecast than when the Dalles last did this in 2016. And so the finding of growth in this round, in this version, is a little bit less robust than it was found in the last go round. Average growth rate that you have experienced is a little under 1% per year, and that forecast going forward works out to about 0.3% per year. So you can see that is lower than what you've experienced. And you have about 61% of family households in the community, and 39% non. Of the forecasted housing need, so again, we find just about 500 need for just about 500 units, 505 to be exact. That would be 7% growth in inventory. We estimate that between the need for new ownership units and new rental units, that most of it is still going to be detached single family homes, but probably going forward, especially to meet rental demand, there will be sort of a greater share of some of the other types of housing we're projecting. So, in your current housing mix, your detached units is more than 61% of your housing stock. But for the net new units going forward, we estimate that you'll need a little bit more of the other housing types while you still provide the single family homes. Next slide.
Brendan, could you speak up a little, please?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Let me lean in. So when it comes to housing growth projections, and what does it need to say that a community needs 500 units over the next 20 years? Well, there's a few things to consider. One is the system, this planning system is set up so that communities don't actually do this every 20 years. They do it more often than that. 20 years is just the planning period that we're looking at. So it will be probably refreshed at some point, I'm guessing in the next 6 to 8 years. But what does it mean? It doesn't mean that the city is somehow on the hook or obligated to provide all the types of housing at the affordability levels identified. It's just to notify the community and for planning purposes of what you think might be needed. But really going forward, the private housing market is still going to provide most of your housing as it always does. But what the private market does is it provides more supply that eases up cost constraints for everyone. But they're also going to provide new housing. So a newly built single family house or a new apartment building, they're going to tend to be have pricing and rents that are near the top of the market. And so the new housing tends to serve the middle to upper income groups. And so as you get into the finding for need at lower income groups, you are hoping that some of the older stock will filter down to serve those people. But also typically you need to think about in terms of various affordable housing partners and programs that are needed to ensure that housing is affordable at those levels. Next slide. And so now we'll get into talking about land, and I think CJ was going to talk about that piece.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you, Brandon. Hi, everybody. My name is CJ Doxey with MIG. I just want to check to see how I'm coming across and if I need to speak a little louder for you folks there.
I think we can hear you just fine.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I'm going to spend the next few slides discussing the buildable land inventory, which really gets to the supply side scenario. And this is a snapshot of our analysis of what the Dow's current supply of available and potentially developable land for residential development to match up with the demand side of things. So this graphic right here presents kind of in a nutshell, the type of process that we use to generate the buildable land inventory. And the main takeaway from here is the elements that we consider and factor into the land inventory, and more importantly, the elements or factors that aren't considered in the land inventory. I think that distinction is very important here. So starting at the top, we look at all land within inside the UGB. So that includes land that's outside city boundaries that have the potential to be annexed and developed in the future. From that starting point, we look at any land that has the capability of developing residential development on it. That's obviously all your residential zones. Any mixed use zones will factor those in as well, or any commercial areas that do allow residential development, we'll look at those as well. From that standpoint, we'll identify land into 3 categories: vacant or infill / redevelopable, and a developed category. Vacant are those lots that are greenfields or have no development on them and are typically the easiest to develop. Your infill or redevelopable lands are those that have some property on them. Typically, it's a larger lot with a single family home on it that has an opportunity to either subdivide or partition out to add additional units on it. In some cases, it's also properties that do have some development on it, but the property value exceeds the development value to a point where we assume that there is some redevelopment potential as part of that. And with those categories, we kind of set the developed properties aside and focus solely on the vacant, the infill, or the redevelopable properties. And from that point, we take a look at environmental constraints such as wetlands, floodplains, slopes that are present on those sites, and deduct those from those parcels and consider those areas not to be developable. And what that gives us is an amount of land that is what we call unconstrained land. And within that amount, we take an additional deduction to, in particular for vacant properties, to account for any potential right-of-way deductions or other utility public infrastructure needs. And what we get is a net buildable acres, which is the number that you'll see in the subsequent slide here that we use to apply our dwelling unit assumptions to get a potential supply of land there.
I ask a question.
Yes, please.
You encourage, how big does a piece of property have to be eligible for what you call subdivision, or you mentioned the word subdivided. I mean, how big does a piece of property have to be eligible for something like that when you run the numbers?
Yes, good question. So for this, state rules have there's a few different ways we do it. We use the state's safe harbor rule, which says for lots of parcels that are at least 1/2 acre in size and contain a single family home on them, we subtract 1/4 acre of that land to account for the existing residential development on it, and the remainder is considered developable. For lots that are greater than 1/2 acre in size and contain more than one single family residence, such as like a multifamily residence or a non-residential use, we identify the vacant areas using aerial imagery and deduct that portion out of it. So if the vacant area is at least 1/4 acre, then that portion is considered vacant, or excuse me, has the potential to develop with residential property on it.
Okay, thank you.
So the elements that are not factored into the land inventory, those include infrastructure constraints. So that is something like building a new road or extending your water, electric, or other utility lines to provide service to those areas. Oftentimes that's a market constraint that we don't factor into it, but it does affect the developability of land. There are property owners' willingness to develop the land. Sometimes a property owner wants to have a more rural area or a more rural piece of property and has no intention of selling it to subdivide or develop further than that. Those are factors that we can't control. Other market drivers, depending on what your just other little factors like what's your typical development price point for a property, depending on what your land value goes for and whether or not that pencils out from a developer pro forma standpoint. Those are factors that we don't include in our land inventory, but we recognize that those do impact the developability. So I think it's important to understand that when we're presenting numbers, this is a potential capacity, but certainly the result will be somewhere below that amount, depending on these other factors that we don't include. Next slide here. So for the Dalles, the environmental constraints that we factored are listed here. They include your floodways and water bodies like wetlands. You have a special flood hazard area that we also factored in there. And then we looked at steep slopes areas, and the way we define steep slopes are contiguous lands of about 1 acre with slopes greater than 25%. So all of these environmental constraints are present. I can say that as far as your special flood hazard areas and floodway water bodies, a lot of your residential areas aren't there, but they are present in some ways, particularly with kind of the more low-lying wetlands areas. And we did deduct those areas out of your residential development, including your steep slopes. You're also kind of on the bluff there. So those are factors that constrain your developable supply of residential land. And then on the next slide, we'll get to the table here. We factored it based off of the zones, and this table here is a bunch of numbers for you, but I think the important things are the numbers along the right column, which break down your net acres, which we're calling buildable acres in this table, and we're just defining it by zone and as areas that are either inside your city limits or outside your city limits, but inside your UGB. And in particular, you have a couple areas that are in your GMA areas. Those are in the table because it came up in our analysis, but those really have no developable potential to them according to our inventory. Everything is going to be either under your low, medium, or high residential zones in this case. So overall, you're looking at about 100 acres of land in your high residential zone that have the potential to add additional residential development to it. In your medium residential zone, you have roughly 30 acres, and in your low residential density zone, you have close to or just a little over 200 acres or close to 200 acres available for that. One thing to keep in mind, in particular about your low density residential zone, is it's a very close to even split between, well, I'd say, yeah, it's a fair amount between your vacant and your partially vacant properties there. Something to keep in mind about your partially vacant properties, in particular with your land outside those UGBs, it's not uncommon to see them show up as partially vacant because those are going to be your more rural areas that do have a single family home on them, but have a high potential to develop once they get brought into a city boundary or have city zoning applied to them. So with that, we do generate, we organize this into the 3 categories in this particular case. And as far as the housing types, we group the housing types based off of what is typically permitted in those zones, but we don't specifically look or consider at the different types of housing that could be done on there. We're grouping those together into a single category, and we're applying a units per acre density assumption to them. So for our low density zone, that's 5.6. That can include a single family detached or attached house. That could include a duplex in any combination, but we're assuming that it's going to be about 5.6 units per acre. For your medium density, that comes out to about 12 units per acre. And in your high density, we're assuming 18.8 units per density. And you can see the housing types that are associated with them. They gradually increase in density to include either cottage clusters, multifamily housing, mobile homes, and that's such. And so with that in mind, applying those gross unit densities to them, we're looking at a potential development capacity of just north of 3,300 units across 3 zones. Most of that is going to be in your high density zone. It has a fair amount of developable acres to it. It also has the highest units per acre assumption to it. So that is going to be where you have your highest gross potential there. You also have a fair amount in your low density residential zone. It's a low gross density unit per acre assumption, but you have, again, close to 200 acres available for that. On the right side of that, we're making a comparison to the demand, which Brandon touched on in previous slides. This takes into account the forecasts and the potential growth. Brandon mentioned just over 500 potential growth and growth of housing over the next 20 years. We've organized that into the corresponding categories of residential density, your residential zones. And you can see that in all cases, according to this analysis, there is available supply, there's adequate land to support the growth in units in each of those zones. You have room to play with, you have room to grow, so to speak. So I think with that, I'm going to take a quick pause. I know this is a lot of information there, but certainly welcome to answer any questions on the supply side of things.
Questions? So the bottom line is we have plenty of land to develop housing development. Is that?
According to this, yes.
Yeah.
Based
And-
on the analysis.
Yeah. Were you able to identify the number of parcels that say exceeded 5 acres that would fall into this category?
Let me see. That should be included in our memo, and I have it pulled up right now. I'm sorry, we don't distinguish that particular category. So that is something that we can generate. We just need to pull up our inventory GIS files and do an analysis or a query on it.
I understand you have to conduct a study in compliance with the LCD's guidelines. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. It would seem to me that if, and I don't even know the answer to the question because you don't have it, but you'll get it. That a lack of parcels of property that are 5 acres or more restricts a city in its ability to attract developers to develop housing. Would you agree with that?
I think it certainly is going to restrict certain types of development. Sort of your typical subdivisions, yes. I mean, because those generally do require larger amounts of land. For some types of development, not as much. So single family attached or townhouses, multifamily, a lot of those attached forms don't require as large of properties as that to develop a decent number of units. But certainly for kind of larger subdivisions or neighborhoods of single family detached homes, it's beneficial to have some larger properties. And we can, like CJ said, we can get you that information as a follow-up in terms of how many of those properties are in the UGB and in the city limits.
Yeah. Councilor Long.
Yeah, so I just want to bring this up and ask you for clarification. I've been on council long enough to have gone through this process a couple times. So basically, when you're talking about land that is available to build on, the larger lots that are outside of the city, limits, but inside the urban growth boundary, we are talking about land that is currently under ag production, for example, cherries. And that is not excluded, correct? When you exclude things out of what's available?
So anything that's in your UGB area outside your vicinity limits that is exclusive farm use or forest practices, you don't really have any forest practices there, but those type of uses, if they are not zoned or have an exception to them, they are not included. So these are areas that are inside your UGB that have a residential designation to them. Those are the ones that we look at. If they happen to have a residential designation, but their current use is a farming practice, then we are still considering that potential development for the purposes of our analysis.
Yeah, I just want to make that clear to the public.
And that's something that DLCD requires.
Yep.
That's part
Yeah,
of their
it's-
guidelines. You have to count that as. Right.
Correct. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
the sort of perspective is over the next 20 years, we don't know if that land's still going to be in agricultural production. And if it's zoned for residential use, it's allowed to be developed for that. And so, yeah, that is part of what we are required to include in our analysis and assumptions.
Well, we ran into the same issue with the last time we talked was the buildable lands inventory for industrial commercial property. And I think it's important for the public to understand that when you have to count cherry orchards and Google owned property as being developable, that really gives the Gorge Commission all the ammunition it needs to prevent the city of the Dalles from expanding its urban growth boundary based on these studies. And we think there's a real fallacy with that sort of assumption. And I know you guys are just following the guidelines, but I just want the public to understand why it's important to us. So,
yeah, understand.
Councilor Runyon.
Looking at the map and the numbers and so forth, the vacant and partially vacant land, it looks like the 6% housing growth by 2043 that you're projecting. You know, I was looking, where's that going to be at? It appears to be mostly to the east.
Correct.
Of our city,
Mhm.
within city limits, but to the east. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
Matt, if you go back a slide, I think that has the BLI map to it. Well, one more slide. So yes, you'll see the majority of the green and yellow parcels. Those are the ones that are considered vacant or partially vacant. Most of those are located in the southeast area of the city there. Certainly some along the western boundary. And obviously most of your developed areas more centrally located and closer to your downtown and core areas.
Since we've already had some issues with development to the east, I'm interested in how this is going to play out over the next few years. Over the next 20 years. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Just
I have
one
a comment go ahead, Darcy, and I'll follow.
more question. So as I'm thinking about this, would it be helpful for us not wanting to or wanting to put our buildings where there is not currently ag? Would this be the time for us to, even though it looks like we have a lot of land, to go ahead and incentivize a denser building in the areas where we do want housing?
That's certainly a policy choice, something you can do. There's nothing to say you can't encourage infill development or redevelopment in your core areas to support denser housing, and that's certainly an option.
That way we could get more housing units, but not have the sprawl into areas we don't necessarily want it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I think that when we talk a little bit about the policies that are proposed to be updated in your comprehensive plan, there are a number of policies that get at that to some degree. And then the housing production strategy process that Josh talked about earlier this evening, that's a process of identifying specific actions or strategies, including incentives to develop certain types of housing in certain areas. So at this point, that's something to look at kind of a policy level. And then in that housing production strategy process, it's something to look at even at a more specific or I guess action oriented level. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Counselor Runyon.
Well, just a thought, and it's not a new one at all. It's something I followed when I was with the county, that housing, which is what this is about, is tied directly to business, in my view. If you don't have prosperous business or incentives to bring business to town, you may not need the houses. And we see a lot of empties on our downtown main streets. So what I would like to see us do in conjunction with this as we go forward or whatnot, to be looking at zoning and permit issues where maybe we're higher than the state minimums or the surrounding communities, things that we can do to incentivize not only developers to build homes, but businesses to locate here. And what can we do to spur that as we do this as a group? Because it's very important, and they are tied together, and along with the school and all the rest of it that's going on in our community right now, trying to move forward. So we've got to get all agencies working together as a team to make this work. And it's not just, here's a spot of land to build a house. Who's going to buy that house? That's the question. And is it somebody who'll come here because of a good school system, good hospitals, good downtown business climate? They're all tied together. So I hope we work towards that. When I was with the county, that was my project, to make sure we were not over permitting more. And if there was a reason why we were asking for more stringent guidelines than the state was requiring, which we can do, is why? And was that a thing in the past that made sense, but maybe doesn't make now? So I would like to make sure we're reviewing all those types of things, codes, zones, permits, et cetera, to make it all work together.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have a demand side question, but I don't think we've quite gotten through all of that part.
This will be coming back to us, right?
It'll be coming back to you as part of the hearings process. But I would say, if you have a question about sort of the demand side, I'd say go ahead and ask it now. We're taking kind of questions on any of this. I will have just a few more slides to kind of round things out, but I mean, I would say, ask the questions at any point, including now.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks for the clarification that you have to, by statute, use the PSU projections, population projections. You mentioned that the growth projections have changed somewhat since the 2016 study. I think you somewhat underplayed it. They radically changed since the 2016 study. And that drives the projected housing needs, right? So last time in the 2016 study that I think we accepted in 2018, we said something like the need will be for something in the area of 1,750 units, and now we're saying 500, so less than a third. So I said that as preamble to my request that we interrogate the PSU analysis a little bit and find out what's changed and try to arrive at a confidence level for the current growth projections, which are pretty modest. We have had, I think it was 1,700 people move in the last 13 years, and now they're projecting 1,000 in the next 20. And maybe that's accurate. I would like clarity on what exactly is going into that analysis, or how they arrived at those numbers. And again, what our level of confidence in those numbers is.
I can speak to that a little bit. So the way that PSU tends to do this is they come to work with the county, and then the county sets up a working group, usually with the various cities, and they sort of allocate out the amount of growth that PSU is forecasting. Basically what we're finding most recent round of housing studies we've done is that the rates are low for many cities. They're simply forecasting a decrease in growth across most of the cities. So that is demographics driven, and you'd have to get into the nitty gritty of their methodology for how that's done. But in terms of confidence levels, I think there's reasons to question it, and that what it points to is the need to think about the next round of when they do projections, and if the city wants to push for higher growth rate, and also to think about how often you might have to do these housing needs analysis, if you might need to do it every 5 years or so in order to refresh this analysis and hopefully get have a
Sure.
more realistic picture.
I want to be clear. I don't want to push any conclusion. I want to have confidence that our analysis is as accurate as we can be, understanding that it's, looking into a crystal ball. So I'm not sure what the step forward here is, but to at least be clear that the analysis has changed very dramatically, and we just need to know what kind of context to make, larger picture decisions in. Is 500 a realistic amount of demand in the next 20 years, or is it?
We can
not
provide.
really?
What I would suggest is that we provide maybe an additional summary comparison of some of the past growth rates with this future growth rate, and that might just provide some context and background numbers that you might want to think about going forward. A simple way to look at it is say, hey, you had a growth rate of closer to 1% since 2010. What if that continued? What would that look like? So we can definitely provide maybe some measures of comparison, as long as everyone realizes that for this official process, we're dealing with that adopted from Portland.
And I would also add that we can also provide some additional information to the extent it's available in PSU's reports about the basis of their assumptions. They prepare reports on their projections for each county. As Brendan said, they project the amount of growth they expect in a county, and then it gets allocated among the cities and the unincorporated areas. So there often isn't a ton of information in those reports about kind of their underlying assumptions about why they're assuming this growth rate or that, but to the extent there is, we can provide that to you. And I think, as Brendan said, we can talk about, for comparison purposes and for just context, well, look, if you were to grow at a higher rate, what would that mean in terms of the amount of growth and that comparison of needed housing and land and supply. But you're a little bit stuck in terms of what you can adopt and can be acknowledged, by the state. So we can provide that additional information, and we can talk about, and we have done this in other communities. We've added some language to the report that says, hey, we're bound to use these projections, as they are from PSU, but there's some, sentiment that those may be too low, and if they're too low, here's what things might look like. So I think those are all sort of options in terms of how we can characterize things in our reports. So I would just kind of add some of that language, or add some of that context as well.
And I will add that PSU, their population research center who conducts these, they conduct them on 4-year intervals. And the next cycle of those forecasts will start in, well, the the current cycle started in 2022 and goes through 2026. I do believe that the region that Wasco is in has not gone through that process yet. So I would say in the next 2 to 3 years, the PRC will be developing new forecasts for the Wasco area. And kind of to Brandon's point there, the county will be convening a work group. That would be a good opportunity for the Dalles to be involved and advocate for numbers that reflect what you're seeing on the ground, and you can share examples of recent developments to inform the work that PSU does.
And I will also just note that, just to put another wrinkle in that, that would be the cycle for PSU, but this process is expected to change a couple of years from now, with the state actually taking over the projection process from PSU. They're still kind of working through the details of all that. They're going through rulemaking processes now at the state level. I cannot predict, I hesitate to even try to predict sort of how that might affect population projections in different parts of the state. But that is my understanding of how that system is going to change somewhat. So it's going to actually move to projections coming from the state, likely the Department of Land Conservation and Development. They will likely be getting technical assistance to do that from likely, I would say, consulting firms or others. So that whole process is sort of in the process of changing within the next 2 or 3 years. So sorry to sort of throw even another wrinkle into things. So this is kind of where we are now. And again, I think, to the extent you have concerns about this stuff, we're happy to kind of describe those and talk about those in the documents we're producing.
I think in professional judgment, you could add as a gloss to the official analysis might be helpful. I say that to staff and to you both. Yeah, I'm not pushing any particular conclusion. I don't think that's proper, but I do think it's worth trying to gain clarity when there's a really fundamental change in an analysis or in some assumptions. We just need to at least acknowledge that and think about it a little bit.
Yep,
So
understand.
thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Runyon.
Just one other comment here, having, several of us, Darcy included, have sat through a number of these, and the mayor has in other communities as well as here. The metrics and the process you have to use, they are what they are. I get that. But what we know who live here is that often the so-called vacant lands used put out there as being developable. Yeah, they are, but they may be tied up by a family that likes their surroundings, and that's why they bought those additional lots. So in my perfect world, I would ask for a conclusion if it was possible, instead of, as these usually do, end up saying we have all this land available when we really, in reality, don't. I'd like to see a summary that somehow in there address the urban growth boundary. And that would help our case with the state to expand the UGB. So if I had a wish in a perfect world, that would be one area I'd like to see some reference to the urban growth boundary.
Okay. I think you're going to supply us with a number of properties that of 5 acres or greater. Could you also break that down by how many are in the low, medium, and high density zones, please? Thank you. Okay, anybody else have any other questions or comments? Okay. And this is going before the Plan Commission again, and then it's going to come back here, right?
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah. I do have just a few more slides. I was going to.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. to the update to the comprehensive plan. So it's not too many. I'll go through them fairly quickly and then see if you have any additional questions, and then we can wrap it up on this. So one of the outcomes of this process is to adopt that housing needs analysis report and kind of the technical analysis that we've been talking about. The other is to update the housing chapter of your comprehensive plan. So there's kind of 3 sets of things in there. One is the background information and findings. That sort of encapsulates or provides kind of a concise summary of the information in the reports, along with the, any other narrative that we need to add. And then, yeah, sorry about that. In terms of these photos, next one, I'll drop in some more photos from the Dalles. We actually have throughout the report, we have a lot of photos from the Dalles, but on this slide, didn't do a great job. Apologies. So anyway, and then goals and policies. So we are recommending a number of updates to goals and policies in this chapter, and then changes to the implementation strategies that are identified in the document. So I'm just going to very generally talk about the types of changes to the goals and policies that are being recommended. If you have questions about any of the specific changes that are listed in your packet, I'm happy to talk about those as well. But I'm just going to kind of talk generally about the types of changes. So one, adding references to the HNA, the housing needs identified in the HNA and the findings, and really, frankly, less about the magnitude of the need and more about the type of the need for different types of housing and land to accommodate that. Incorporating some housing planning best practices into those policies. There's some outdated information in your goals and policies that's kind of left over from, really much earlier updates. So to the extent things are outdated in terms of those things have been done or they don't exist, then we've suggested eliminating that. Same thing, there's some policies that are duplicative, and so we've suggested eliminating the ones that are duplicative. Want to make sure that policies are courses of action, not just a single action that once it's done, it's no longer kind of relevant in the comp plan because you've already done it, because comp plans are intended to last, or provide policy direction for a long period of time. So, and then you also want to kind of avoid creating any potential conflicts between policies in the plan and things that are in your development code. You want the policies to support what's in your development code, but you don't want them to be so specific that they are equivalent to standards that would be in your development code. So you do have a few things like that in your comp plan now, and we're suggesting that you don't need those there because they're in your development code. And then finally, just want to make sure that we're also incorporating other community goals and objectives in this chapter where they relate directly to housing. So those are the types of changes that we've identified and talked through with the Planning Commission and Advisory Committee about making, and that are all reflected in the packet that you've got. I think, yep, that's kind of it in terms of what we had to present. Next steps, again, will be to make any changes that we need to make before then taking this through the adoption process, coming back to the Planning Commission and then all of you. So any other questions for us?
Councilor Long.
Yeah, so just I'm looking at the goal 10 policies, and I think that's page 114 of the comprehensive planning housing chapter. So that looks like there's a new item number 3 talking about encouraging the creation of neighborhood centers along 10th, 12th corridor. And I'm wondering, where did this policy come from? Is this specifically that Planning Commission came up with this policy, or this, what is this from?
So this actually is language from another existing policy. If you sort of scroll down and see some of the strike through stuff down below under C, we basically just shifted some of that up into its own policy. And so most of these areas were already identified, or a number of these areas, I should say, were already identified in an existing policy in your comprehensive plan. And then we, based on some suggestions from staff, added some additional locations just to kind of expand those potential locations. So it's a combination of some existing policy language in the comp plan and some additional areas identified by staff that might make sense for, again, similar types of development.
Okay,
Yeah, I guess I've been through this process a couple times. I don't remember that being in there.
Yeah, it was under previous policy 4B or 4C, excuse me. So
Yeah, I
4C
see that
to say,
now.
yeah, so it identified the 10th, 12th corridor, Garrison Street, Kelly Ave, Dry Hall Road. So there's a couple new ones, but most of the ones there were in there before.
So basically, at this point, this document is something that you've pulled together based on our previous documents. It's not, you haven't asked anybody at quote unquote the city staff. I guess staff has participated, but
Yeah.
For what we might want for new policies. This is just
Well-
a revision on your
Well,
own.
no, I mean, I would not say that. So it was, yes, we recommended changes, but some of the changes came from your staff. We then reviewed this set of policies with the Planning Commission and Advisory Committee for this process and got their opinion. We made a number of changes based on their comments. So it started out with us taking a look at your existing comprehensive plan policy, goals, policies, and implementation strategies, recommending the types of changes that I talked about just a moment ago, getting input from staff. So there was a fair bit of input from staff as part of this. Then reviewing with the Planning Commission and Advisory Committee, and now coming to you all and seeing if you all have any, anything you think should change or you have concerns or questions about. So it's kind of why we're here tonight, in part, is to see if you have any questions about or changes to any of this in here. So.
Well, I think for myself, I wasn't prepared to make changes. I was trying to understand your process. There's a lot of material to take in and be able to process and make a recommendation on the spot for something so serious.
Yeah, and we're not asking you all to approve anything tonight. Just ask us
Not
questions.
approved, but if we wanted to make recommendations, I'm saying it's hard to make them on the fly.
Sure, understand. And tonight's not your only, your only chance to do that. We're going to the Planning Commission for a public hearing not until November. So I would say, take a look at this, and if you all, any of you have any comments or thoughts about it, particularly the policies and implementation strategies, let Josh know, and he can convey that to us. And there's definitely time to make adjustments here. So we're happy to hear anything you have to tell us tonight, but tonight is not your only time to do that. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
just to sort of dovetail on what Mr. Hasty just explained. Great work on this, Matt, by the way. This is Jonathan. With respect to the comp plan, the city can always, the city council can always direct staff to go investigate making revisions to the comp plan at any time. If it's connected to the housing needs analysis and the report that APG is developing, right, that's their report. We're going to, sort of inform their analysis, but we're not going to, tell them what they should say. But when it comes to the comp plan, it's the city's land use comprehensive plan. And so if there's at any time, any changes that this council wants to make on those or wants us to investigate making, that's something that we can do in-house at nearly any time. The only rub there is that any amendments need to go through the Planning Commission first, but council ultimately adopts those changes. And so again, that can happen at generally any time, even on goal 10, on any of the goals, really, just not on the HNA itself. So just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
And I can add to the neighborhood center. Yes, there was, staff contributed. I think we added possibly or encouraging 2 possible new locations for these neighborhood centers, and Chenoweth Loop Road and Richmond Street being those 2, really, because we are seeing development along Chenoweth Loop Road that is more civic space. We have schools over there. There are businesses along Chenoweth Loop Road, and the other is Richmond Street. And this was one. My recommendation, as we start to see growth go out to the east side, encouraging a neighborhood center over there would allow for the development at some point in the future of a grocery store over in the Richmond area, which would then encourage more of a neighborhood node, if you will, rather than people traveling all the way from Richmond into the business areas. So, and these are all just, encouraging these neighborhood centers, not like they will happen, but just something to consider.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments?
Very briefly. Sorry, Scott, were you? I had sort of a similar question mark about the neighborhood centers, though my read of the proposed changes are that they're pretty straightforward and seem to make on first read make a lot of sense. So maybe I just need some more background on how we envision a neighborhood center. That would be maybe useful if there's a document or some language you could share with us at some point. But my question is about the housing production strategy. What's the time frame on that?
Yeah, so the timeline is 1 year, required 1 year, which to adopt it 1 year from the date we adopt the housing needs analysis. So the plan would be getting that in the budget for this next fiscal year and working on it basically starting right after in the summer of 2024.
Great, thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you, Matt. Thank you,
Yeah,
CJ
thank
and
you.
Brendan. And we'll see you guys back here in a
Thank
few
you.
months.
All right. Thank you very much.
That concludes the city, at least this portion of the city council meeting. And now the city council of the city of the Dalles will now meet in an executive session in accordance with ORS 192.6602E to conduct deliberations with persons designated to negotiate real property transactions. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the discussions or deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. Media is reminded to not record audio or video any of the portion of the executive session. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will return to open session and welcome the audience back into the room. If you're still there. We anticipate the executive session will take no more than 30 minutes. Thank you all for attending.